Good morning and welcome to Sophie Ridge on Sunday. Well, the bar for nail-biting weeks in politics is already very high, but it's no exaggeration to say that the last few days have been some of the most dramatic in post-war British political history. And on today's show, we have two people at the very centre of the storm. The long-awaited draft Brexit deal was finally published. Things didn't go quite to plan. Two members of the cabinet resigned, including the Brexit secretary, and there was a move to try and force the Prime Minister from Downing Street. That could reach ahead in the next 48 hours with a possible vote of no confidence in her leadership. With that in mind, we'll be asking the Prime Minister how she plans to get her Brexit plans through a cabinet, a parliament and a country which remains as divided as ever. We'll also be speaking to the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn, about his alternative plan. And ahead of a gathering of business leaders tomorrow, I'll be speaking to the Director General of the CBI, Caroline Fairbairn. But first, for all the Conservative Party's divisions over Brexit, Labour has some difficulties of its own. The fundamental problem of having a pro-EU membership that many voters who backed Leave has left the party walking a delicate tightrope, which is increasingly looking like it could snap, and the time for choosing a side is fast approaching. Well, to talk about that and lots more, we're joined now by Jeremy Corbyn. Thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, we finally know what the government's plan for Brexit looks like. So is that something that the Labour Party could support? No,
we can't support it. It doesn't meet our tests. We don't believe it meets the needs of the country. We do think it would be much better if the Labour alternative of access to a market, a guaranteed permanent form of customs union with the European Union and protection of rights in this country would be a better deal for this country as a whole.
So what specifically is it in the text that doesn't meet those tests that you disagree with?
Well, a number of things that are in this agreement that are simply not acceptable. One is that the issue of Northern Ireland is not dealt with because it will mean that there will be a border down the Irish Sea unless an agreement is reached within 2 years.
But how do you plan to solve that yourself?
Well, you have an agreement with the European Union for a customs union for the whole of the UK. That has to be the basis for it.
That is the backstop, though, isn't it?
Well, but we have no say in that until such time as a backstop has been agreed, and during that period, the EU calls all the shots, and the EU decides whether we're allowed to change that arrangement or not. It's a one-way agreement. It's quite risky.
The issue, of course, is that you know, I know how critical the moment is. I understand that you have concerns, such as whether or not we can leave the backstop unilaterally. But are those concerns big enough that you are risking no deal? Because that's the reality of your position, isn't it?
No, it's not the reality at all. We would say we'll vote against this deal because it doesn't meet our test. We do not believe it serves the interests of this country. Therefore, the government would have to go back to the EU and renegotiate rapidly. They've had, after all, since the referendum of 2016 to undertake serious negotiations, and here we are now 131 days to go, and they're finally presenting something to Parliament. It's not a very acceptable way of running things.
But you know, don't you, that the likelihood of no deal increases if you don't support this deal? And we can just have a look at what you've said previously about the risk of no deal. You've said that if we vote against that, if we don't have a Brexit deal, that would be a national disaster. So are you risking a national disaster?
Not at all. We're saying now to the government, you haven't got a majority in Parliament for this. You don't have a majority support in the whole country. You have to go back and do something better. Indeed, there are already the Prime Minister's outriders in her own cabinet who are saying, well, actually, we'll have to go and negotiate something else.
So what specifically do you want? So if, for example, you were talking there about being able to unilaterally leave the backstop, if that was something that the government could negotiate, would you then support it?
What I would say to the government is you've got to get in place a permanent customs arrangement with the European Union. Otherwise, we lose on jobs, we lose on investment, and we lose on future economic development.
So it's a future relationship that you
indeed
want to
there's
see
that,
the change.
but they've also got to be very, very clear about rights and objectives. Put it two ways. One is the government has embraced without any question whatsoever EU rules on state aid. It hasn't embraced without any question the issue of workers' rights. If European workers' rights improve, ours can deteriorate at the same time. What I want to see is absolutely an alignment with Europe on workers' rights, or we go further than that. The danger is that we end up with the movement which many on the Tory right want, which is a deregulated economy moving further and further away from what is our major trading partner, Europe.
So if you have I'm just trying to really pin you down on exactly what it would be that gets you over the line and to support the deal, because I'm still slightly unclear on what exactly it is that would mean you'd come back and say, OK, Prime Minister, we'll support.
There's 500 pages in this document, much of which are actually quite vague. Where's the guarantee on environmental protections? Where's the guarantee on consumer protections? Where's the guarantee on workers' rights? Where's the guarantee on trade?
But there are some guarantees. There are the level playing field commitments, for example.
Think of all those people working in manufacturing industry in Britain and those thousands of jobs in supply chains all across the Midlands and the North who will be very worried that their companies are going to either disinvest or not invest in the future, and we'll see a continuing rundown of our manufacturing industry. What we want is an expanding economy and a fairer economy.
The level playing field commitments are in that withdrawal agreement. Have you read the 500 pages?
I've read a lot of it, not every last word. I've read many summaries and many other analyses, as I'm sure you have as well.
So just to really try and clarify then, so is there anything you can say specifically that if Theresa May comes back with these points, you will vote for the deal?
We've put it to the government many, many times. I believe there is a majority in Parliament that would support a permanent customs arrangement with the European Union. I believe there is a majority in Parliament that would want to see a guarantee of rights on both sides of the Channel. And there's absolutely a majority in Parliament that does not want to see a deal that brings in effect, a financial border across the Irish Sea.
Mr Corbyn, can Brexit be stopped?
As of this moment, the arithmetic in Parliament is such that Brexit has been triggered, Article 50. We voted for Article 50 in order to give respect to the referendum. And I was asked this question by Der Spiegel. What I said was, we couldn't stop it because we don't have the votes in Parliament to do so. What I want to do is say to the government, you've had all this time to negotiate. You're not going to get this thing through Parliament. Don't waste another 2 weeks on this. Go back now, because you must have read the runes in Parliament. You can't get it through. I
just want to go back to this point and get some real clarity on it. We can have a look at what you said in the interview that you mentioned. When you asked about Brexit, you said, we can't stop it. Your Brexit secretary then said, Brexit can be stopped. So who's right? Because I'm a bit confused.
Well, I said, we can't stop it, because on our own, obviously, we can't. Keir said, Brexit can be stopped. Clearly, a vast majority of people could if they all agreed to do so. But the point I'm making is...
You say that you can't stop Brexit.
On our own.
Time, if Labour swung behind the campaign for a people's vote, there would be...
Well, the people's vote is the second question, isn't it, actually? The issue is there was a referendum in 2016. A majority voted to leave the EU. There are many reasons why people voted. I don't think you call a referendum and then say you don't like the result, you go away from it. You've got to understand why people voted and try and negotiate the best deal you can. I do not believe this government has negotiated the best deal it can. All options are on the table in the future.
So is no Brexit better than no deal then, in your opinion?
I don't think that's an option we're going to get given. The issue is we're moving up towards the end of March when Britain will be leaving the EU under the current proposals. This government has failed in negotiations, failed to protect things, and at the same time actually made this country much worse. I mean, this is a week when the UN has condemned Britain for unacceptable levels of poverty. What does that say about this government? What does it say about this country?
At the same time, though, you are the leader of the opposition at this critical moment. Yeah. You have a responsibility to try and drive the debate. It's one thing just to duck out and say, actually, I don't think we're going to be given that option. We don't have the numbers to get it through. But you are in a position where you have a large number of MPs, you have a large number of party members. You could drive the debate if you wanted to.
We are driving a debate about the kind of society we want in Britain. We're driving a debate about the kind of relationship with Europe in the future.
But what about Brexit?
We forced the government onto the whole concept of a transition. We forced them into accepting amendments in Parliament on the meaningful vote at the end of it. Labour has been absolutely on this case ever since the referendum.
Do you think there should be a second referendum? What do you think?
I think it's an option for the future, but it's not an option for today, because if we put a referendum tomorrow, what's it going to be on? What's the question going to be?
What would you like the question to be on? Would you like Remain to be on the ballot paper?
I think that the tests against the government have to be put now, and that's what we're doing. The government must go back and renegotiate and see what it comes back with, and Parliament must look at that time. I think to do anything else now would be to ignore the reality of the situation, is that this government has had all this time to negotiate and hasn't really achieved anything.
I'm keen to talk about your position, though, not just that we know what you think about the government's position, but I'm just keen to examine Labour's position as well. How would you vote if there was a second referendum?
I voted in the first referendum to remain. I campaigned for remain and reform. Indeed, I had a debate in this very building to discuss exactly that issue. I think there are reforms needed in the European Union. I think in the future we could have a good, effective relationship with the European Union, which would give us a permanent customs union, which would give us a trade agreement, and above all, would also ensure that we fully cooperate with them on environment and protections.
How would you vote then?
Well, I don't know how I'm going to vote, what the options would be at that time, but I wanted us to remain in the EU. That was my vote in that referendum.
OK. Now, you often say that you want to see a general election. It's very hard to see in many ways how that would happen. Yesterday, your Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, admitted that because of the Fixed Term Parliament Act, it would be very difficult. It's very unlikely, isn't it, that we're going to get a general election? Can you admit that now? No,
it's not unlikely at all. This government cannot control Parliament. It doesn't have a majority. The DUP have walked away from their fundamental agreement on the European Union.
So just talk me through how we'd get to a general election.
We could get to a general election if the government resigned and called one. We could get to a general election if 2/3 of MPs voted to have one under the Fixed Term Parliament.
Which is unlikely.
Last time round, nobody expected a general election. The Prime Minister decided to call one because she thought she could win it and do very well. The result was rather different to the one that she expected. I think the country needs stability. It needs an opportunity to have a say on who it wants to conduct the negotiation with the European Union and who it wants to deal with the chronic social issues facing Britain. I mentioned the UN report on poverty. Isn't that pretty damning of our country?
But how you say that it's not unlikely, but that 2/3 of MPs would need to vote for it. So
look,
you
listen,
can't. I mean, you can't really expect the DUP or Conservative MPs to vote to potentially allow you into power, can you?
We will continue to
very optimistic.
We will continue to press the whole issues on Europe and on social justice in Britain. We will continue to demand the British people have a say in who their government should be negotiating these arrangements. I don't believe this government has negotiated fairly or effectively or kept Parliament properly informed of it, and indeed has now come up with an agreement in which we pay a great deal of money and have very little say in anything for the whole of the transition period, and indeed give the EU control over arrangements.
In just 3 months, do you really think you could negotiate a better deal than the government? I mean, is that fantasy politics? It's taken 2 years to get to this point.
The EU is very used to 11th hour stuff. Look at the way the Lisbon Treaty was negotiated, renegotiated and renegotiated again. The issue has to be, you go back to Europe and say, listen, our Parliament doesn't agree with this and doesn't accept it. People of this country don't. There are jobs on both sides of the channel at risk here. We need an agreement, a serious, sensible agreement, and I believe the Labour options are the serious ones that could achieve that.
So just go back to the EU and ask them very nicely if they'd give us a better deal. I mean, it's
fantasy,
isn't it?
They want an agreement just as much as everybody else does. The problem is this government has not negotiated an effective agreement with them.
So you think you could do it in 3 months?
We would go there straight away, and there is a transition period that's been agreed anyway, so there would be some opportunities there. But of course, you have to go back and say, look, what's been agreed so far between our government and the EU is not acceptable to the British Parliament, or I suspect the British people, and it hasn't yet been tested in the EU Parliament either.
I want to look at your 6 tasks because it's something you mentioned at the beginning of the interview, and it's something that many people just don't think could be possibly achieved by anybody, including yourselves perhaps. Do you really think you would be able to get a deal that would meet those 6 tests, including one of them, which is that it would deliver the exact same benefits as being in the single market? I mean, how do you get that? Unless you accept free movement of people.
If you have a trade agreement and a customs union with the EU, then you do get the same benefits of trade, you do get the same benefits of the way in which our manufacturing industries
are so benefits as the single market.
Are so inextricably linked. And where did those words come from? The government themselves.
It came from David Davis.
It came from David Davis.
He wasn't even the last Brexit secretary. You can't be saying you were basing
He was the last but one Brexit secretary.
Well, quite. You're saying you're basing your whole policy on Brexit around the last but one Brexit.
quoting back at them what they said, and we believe it to be possible.
But this is more about them playing politics. By quoting David Davis's words back. This is very serious stuff.
No. We're very serious about this. We're very serious about our concerns over jobs and investment and trade with the European Union in the future.
The issue that we have, of course, is that you say you want to deliver the exact same benefits of the single market, but that goes against what we've been hearing from Brussels for months. I mean, we can look, for example, can't we, at something that Jean-Claude Juncker, the EU's most senior official, said on this. The deal that will be offered to the UK should not be a deal as advantageous as membership. So I don't understand how you can get the exact same benefits. Well,
that was his view. We have a different view.
So he's wrong, you think?
I don't want to say Juncker was wrong. What I want to say is we believe we could get the same benefits on trade, on customs union with the European Union.
But why would they give you that?
Because it's in the interests of people on both sides of the channel to do so.
But isn't it in their interest to show that you're better off in the EU?
I think it's in their interests to have a very good and close relationship with the countries around the EU, as they are attempting to do with all other neighbouring countries. And I think that is the right way forward.
So why aren't they, in that case, giving the best deal possible to this current government, if it is in their interest as well?
That's a question you have to put to the EU negotiators. I've had many discussions with Michel Barnier, explained what our position is, explained what we would wish to do in government, and explained also that we would not be a government that's trying to look over our shoulders, do sweetheart deals with somebody else, which would result in a lowering of our conditions in this country, workers, consumers, and environmental rights. And indeed, President Macron has joined in this yesterday and said he's very concerned about Britain reducing its environmental protection measures.
OK. Now, I'm interested in your own personal journey when it comes to the EU. You know, you voted to leave the European Economic Community in the 1975 referendum. You opposed the creation of the European Union in the Maastricht Treaty. You voted against...
No, I opposed the Maastricht Treaty because it was bringing in an unaccountable central bank and it was moving in the direction of a free market Europe. But
so you opposed
by parallel, I strongly supported the social measures that were brought in by the European Union, which Mrs Thatcher so strongly opposed. So I do support a social Europe. And actually, I've probably spent more time meeting European socialist parties than any other Labour leader ever has.
But it's fair to say that you've had your concerns over the years about the EU and about the European community.
I've had concerns about
I'm interested in your journey. Have you changed your mind? Would you consider yourself to be a Eurosceptic? Where are you at?
I've always been in favour of social cooperation across Europe. I've always been in favour of better workers' rights. I strongly supported the whole social chapter agenda that was brought in the European Union. What I opposed was the development of free market economics in Europe. What I opposed was the state aid rules, which limit to differing extents the ability of a government to intervene on its own economy, like we would want to protect the steel industry, and also have concerns about some of the competition rules, particularly in relation to things like postal services and rail services.
So would you describe yourself as a Eurosceptic?
I would describe myself as a socialist who wants to see social justice in this country and across Europe. And I will be in Lisbon at the beginning of December with fellow socialist parties, making exactly that message and exactly that case. We have to work with people across Europe.
Do you think that the EU should have learned and listened more when it came to the Brexit referendum? Do you think that they've taken the right lessons?
I think a lot of people need to learn from the referendum.
But how about Brussels and the EU?
I think they have actually to some extent, and indeed I've discussed this with Michel Barnier and others. I said, well, actually, the communities we have in Britain that have seen no investment since the end of the miners' strike, that have seen the loss of jobs, that have seen the replacement of good jobs with zero-hours contracts. It's not that different in parts of northern France. It's not that different in parts of eastern Germany. Communities that gain nothing from public investment, nothing from new infrastructure, nothing from any investment in hope for young people, are likely to be against the institutions that they believe have failed to deliver it for them. And I think there's a big lesson for all of us, and that's why it's the third time I've mentioned it. The UN report on poverty in Britain is devastating of the economic model that we've adopted in this country.
In all your years in Parliament, you probably haven't seen many weeks quite like the one we've just experienced in Westminster. It might be fair to say.
It's been a pretty unusual week. That's very fair to say, yes.
You were called in to see the Prime Minister after she had that cabinet meeting. What happened?
We had a quite short discussion solely about parliamentary process in which I made the point that I thought Parliament should have sufficient time between the EU Council and any vote in Parliament for members to digest whatever comes out of the EU Council, which of course hasn't yet been held, and our select committees to have a chance to examine it, and that whatever statement or resolution the government put to the House had to be open to amendments. And I sent a letter to the Prime Minister signed by all opposition parties except for the DUP on that.
Was it a cordial meeting?
Yes, it was very short actually.
No cup of tea then?
I had a very nice glass of water, but I was offered a very nice cup of tea or coffee if I wished it. And since I don't drink, I don't know if I was going to be offered drinks or not.
Just to your reflections as well on the week that the Prime Minister has had. She's faced resignations from her cabinet. She's faced no confidence letters from her own MPs. I mean, this is something that you may have a bit of empathy for, because you, of course, have struggled to form a front bench before. You've faced a no confidence motion against you. Do you feel sorry for the Prime Minister?
Well, politics is full of lots of thrills and spills. There is quite a big difference between Labour and Conservative parties in that Labour is largely a member-led organisation, and my mandate came from party members, and I appealed to them in 2016 and gained an increased level of support.
Sorry for her?
I don't do personal attacks and personal abuse, and you notice I've said nothing personal in criticism. I do understand what people go through, and I understand all of that, but I do also understand the responsibility of Parliament and government to deliver for the people that have put us there in the first place. Those people that are struggling with jobs, poverty, mental health, all those issues where we're systematically shortchanging them, they're the people we should be thinking about.
Do you respect the Prime Minister?
I respect all politicians.
OK, Jeremy Corbyn, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, after the break, don't go anywhere, we'll be talking to the Director General of the CBI, Caroline Fairbairn.
We're not going back, they chant. It's repatriation day for the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, but they're not ready to return. We want justice, they shout. Justice for our families who were tortured, one man yells. They ran from murder and rape in Myanmar. Until their rights and safety are guaranteed, they won't go back voluntarily.
Arab বিশ্বাস নয় বর্মার হুকুমত বেশি বেঈমান এখন একটা হয় আরেকটা দাসা আবাদ দাসে মানুষ নিজেই ওরে তার পাশে দাসে গলায় ওরে আরারে আম্মাতা 2 বছর বাদে কি করিব বাজ্জাই ওরে ছাড়াই দিব ওদে
Rahila Begum's baby son was only just born when they fled from Myanmar. This shows you how traumatised the Rohingya are and how unrealistic the current repatriation plans are. They say they can't go back to Myanmar, yet if they do, they fear they'll be killed. Despite the reassurances, the Rohingya stood firm. No one is leaving today.
We are committed to the principle of voluntary repatriation. So if nobody really is willing to repatriate voluntarily, I'm not going to force them.
Officials say they'll keep looking for volunteers to repatriate, but there won't be any. Not while the Rohingya still fear death across the border. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Bangladesh.
Welcome back. Well, ever since the referendum, business has been crying out for some certainty, and the publication of the Brexit plan was supposed to provide that. Instead, the markets fell and the pound dropped. Well, joining us now is a woman who is seen by many as the voice of business, the CBI Director General, Caroline Fairbairn. Thank you very much for being with us on a very busy show. As we were, just remarking in the introduction to you, business is desperate for certainty. Now you've got a bit of a glimpse about the government's plans for Brexit. What do you make of it?
Well, you're absolutely right. Business has been desperate for certainty right from the referendum, so 2.5 years. We know that 40% of our businesses had postponed investment or cut it a year ago. That has now risen to 80%. I have received call after call this week from firms saying, do I, don't I, switch my plans, move jobs out of the UK. And so when they look at this deal, what they see is something that is not perfect. It is a compromise. Everyone has had to compromise on all sides, but it does have two benefits for business. The most important one is it takes no deal off the table, and no deal is a very bad outcome for our country. The rationing at ports, the shortages, the impact on our supply chains. But the second benefit that it has is it does open up a pathway to a frictionless trade deal in the future, one where we get better access for our services, one where we have a say over rules. So those are two really important benefits. And there is a third one, which is it enables us to get back to the domestic priorities that really matter for our country: skills, innovation, how we fix our infrastructure. So not perfect, but a compromise, and we should not be going backwards.
You say it's not perfect, but it's interesting to see the first point you made was about no deal. I mean, can you paint a picture of what you think no deal would be like? Because there are some MPs who think that actually no deal or leaving on WTO rules would be better than what's on the table.
I think the more we have looked at what no deal means, and particularly as we're only 4 months away from it, the more serious we think it would be.
And is that because we haven't prepared properly for it?
It is partly that, and it is partly the reality of our economy. So just take, for example, the rationing that we would need to have at Dover. So we have some arteries that come into our country. And if we have no deal, we're going to have to work out what we prioritise. So maybe medicines come through, certain kinds of food, but what about our just-in-time manufacturing parts that keep our manufacturing businesses going? What about the chemicals that we need for our water industry? What about all of the things that are so vital for the rest of what we do? So that is one thing. The other part of the picture is what this means for investment. We have international investors watching us right now. And in terms of the case for investing in the UK, they can't see it. No deal would make that worse. So I think we must be in no doubt that, and business is entirely united on this, along with the NHS and many others, that no deal is something that must come off the table. And this compromise, this agreement, it's not perfect, but it does do that.
It's interesting because in the draft plan that was allegedly leaked to journalists, your name came up as someone that the government could rely on to defend their deal. I mean, this sounds a little bit like a plan coming into place.
Well, I'd never seen that document, so we are completely independent on this, and we responded after I'd had a terrific briefing. I was able to respond on Wednesday after we'd seen it. We have been absolutely clear from the beginning as business about what matters: frictionless trade, access for our services, a smooth transition, avoiding no deal. So that's what we're judging this deal against. We could take other routes. There are lots of potential different routes being placed on the table. But what would that do to the uncertainty of our country? What would that do to the investment decisions that firms are making and jobs? That is the litmus test that we would ask everybody involved in this deal now to use. It's about people at the end of the day.
We've just heard from Jeremy Corbyn, who was calling for the government to negotiate a permanent customs union. Is that something that you want to see?
Well, we have always been very clear that we think unless and until that there is an alternative to a customs union that gives the same kind of benefits, we think it is a good idea. But it's very important to say that the final deal has not been negotiated yet. I mean, a lot of the conversation has been around the backstop. No one wants to use that. It is a technicality in many ways, and the path is still open for a frictionless trade deal. It won't be easy, there'll be more negotiation, but that is still very much the route that is opened up by this deal.
I'm interested to know what your reaction has been watching the events in Westminster unfold. We'd have resignations from the Cabinet. We've had MPs parading letters of no confidence in the Prime Minister. It's become more and more clear how difficult it's going to be for the Prime Minister to get this draft deal through Parliament. What would your message be to MPs?
I think many businesses, and I sort of share some of this, we've watched on with a degree of horror that there is just so little sense of consensus, it almost feels like there is a Westminster bubble beyond which people are not thinking about the real people in this country who work in our manufacturing industries who will be affected by this. And I think our message from business, and it's a really heartfelt one that comes, I think, of frustration and concern about the future, is listen to the businesses in your constituencies. Go out and talk to people and ask whether they now feel it is time to move on, whether it is now time to move beyond this, so that we can talk about the NHS and skills and all the things that really do matter to our country, so that when they come and they vote, they're doing it based on what people and businesses really think.
Do you think that at the minute they're not putting their constituents first, they're not putting the businesses first?
I think that there is a real danger that this becomes almost a political parlour game in Westminster, where there are all sorts of different views that are swirling around, while the rest of the country sits on and watches, and they are the ones who are going to be affected. There is evidence out there. If MPs go and talk to their local businesses about the impact on their supply chains, can they get fresh food, can they get the parts for their automotive industry, they will get a picture of how important it is to avoid no deal, to take the progress that we have got, and not to move backwards.
The CBI, of course, represents many businesses, but at the same time, you don't represent all businesses. This week, 200 business leaders signed a letter calling on MPs to vote against this deal. They said it's the worst of all worlds. Aren't they right?
So I think that they represent a point of view that thinks there might be some other great option out there. I think I go back to the point about certainty. Here we are, 2.5 years on from the referendum. There have been negotiations throughout all that time. We have some progress. There's one option that could open up a Pandora's box of all sorts of possible ideas, and there are many out there. Or we can say, this is the negotiation that has delivered progress, and we use that to move on. These are hard choices. This is not a perfect deal, but we have to play the cards in front of us. And going backwards, I think for many businesses, does not feel like the right thing to do.
OK, thank you very much for talking us through your verdict on the detail that we finally have. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
After the break, you don't want to miss it, it's the Prime Minister, Theresa May. Good morning. You're watching Sophie Ridge on Sunday. It's been a busy morning so far. We've been speaking to the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. In a moment, we'll be talking to the Prime Minister, Theresa May. But first, let's have a recap of what the Labour leader had to say about the possibility of a second referendum. So do you think there should be a second referendum? What do you think?
I think it's an option for the future, but it's not an option for today, because if we put a referendum tomorrow, what's it going to be on? What's the question going to be?
What would you like the question to be on? Would you like Remain to be on the ballot paper?
I think that the tests against the government have to be put now, and that's what we're doing. The government must go back and renegotiate and see what it comes back with, and Parliament must look at that time. I think to do anything else now would be to ignore the reality of the situation, is that this government has had all this time to negotiate and hasn't really achieved anything.
The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn there. Well, if the last 7 days have been tumultuous, the next 7 are going to be critical. It's going to be a make-or-break week, not just for the government, but for the country. Well, joining us now to discuss that is the Prime Minister, Theresa May. Thank you very much for being with us. It's been a difficult week, shall we say. You've lost seven members of your team, including your Brexit secretary. We've seen Conservative MPs parading letters of no confidence in you in front of those TV cameras. Have you ever thought at any stage about just giving up? What's the point of this?
No, I haven't. And of course it's been a tough week. Actually, these negotiations have been tough right from the start, but they were always going to get even more difficult right towards the end when we're coming to that conclusion. But what I think is this isn't about me. It's actually about what's right for the people of this country. It's about what's in the national interest. That's what drives me, and that's what I'm being driven to deliver. That's what I want to deliver for people, and that's what I believe this deal does. I think it is the right deal in the national interest. And these next 7 days are going to be critical. They are about the future of this country. It's about people's jobs, it's about their livelihoods, it's about the future for their children and grandchildren.
You said there that it's been a difficult week. I mean, that's quite an understatement, really. At one point, it looked like the whole house of cards could come falling down, but you did manage to hang on to some of those crucial Brexiteer cabinet members, people like Michael Gove, like Andrea Leadsom, but they seem to be saying that they'll only stay if there is more movement on the deal. We can have a look at something that Andrea Leadsom said yesterday. She said there is still more to be done and we do still have time before the EU Council. Is she right? Is there any space for more manoeuvre?
Well, there is indeed more negotiation taking place, and nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. But perhaps I could explain the nature of the deal, because actually there are two parts to this deal. There's what you might be called the leaving part of the deal, and then there's the future relationship, the future deal that we're going to have with the European Union. What that future deal does is delivers on the vote that people gave us in the referendum in 2016. It delivers a Brexit that brings back control of our money, our laws and our borders. It means we bring an end to free movement once and for all. For example, no jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. That's the future. That delivers on Brexit for people. There's been some controversy and concern about the leaving part of the deal and about this thing called the backstop or the insurance policy for Northern Ireland, but that will only be temporary. What is going to determine our future relationship, bring that end to free movement, end to the jurisdiction of the Court of Justice, is that future part of the deal. These two go together, and we won't agree on, we won't agree to withdraw the leaving part until we've got the future part.
Well, let's be clear then, because you said there that there's some more space for negotiation. Is it the leaving part that's done and dusted? Is the negotiation going to come when it comes to what is written in that future declaration?
Well, as I say, we won't agree the leaving part, if you like, that was the withdrawal agreement, until we've got what we want in the future relationship, because these two go together.
So there is
now,
space to change it then?
No, the focus this week will be on the future relationship. And when we were in the House of Commons, a number of members of Parliament were saying, we want some more detail on that future relationship. That's what we're working on this week. But it's the future relationship that delivers on the Brexit vote. It's the future relationship that actually says this is the right deal for the future of our country, because it's a deal that's in the national interest, in the interests of people up and down this country, worried about their jobs and worried about their children's future.
It's been 2 years to get to this point, so you're really saying that you're going to change the future relationship deal in the next 7 days? That's a pretty tight timetable.
No, over the 2 years, there's been a lot of negotiation. A lot of the negotiation has focused on the withdrawal part, the leaving part, And just to give an example, Sophie, right at the very beginning, I said for those people from the European Union living here in the UK and UK citizens who are living in the other 27 countries of the European Union, we need to make sure that their life choice is protected, their rights are protected. So, there was early negotiation on that, for example. What we're now focusing on is getting in that more detail on what the future relationship will be, so that we make sure that we deliver for people. That's what this is about.
What are you
doing? It's about delivering Brexit for people.
What are you going to do then in the next 7 days? Because it's not long.
We will be negotiating. I'll be going back to Brussels. We will be negotiating.
So when are you going back to Brussels?
Well, the negotiating teams are working as we speak, and obviously which day I go back to Brussels, when I go back, will determine partly be about how those negotiations go. So I will be going back to Brussels. I'll be in touch with other leaders as well, because the summit next week, and it is next week, this special European Council, will be among the European leaders.
So who will you be meeting in Brussels?
Well, I want to will meet Jean-Claude Juncker and sit down and talk to him. He's responsible for the Commission side of the, obviously,
and is the
all of this.
withdrawal agreement on the table when you have that meeting?
The withdrawal agreement, as we agreed the withdrawal agreement in principle on last week, the withdrawal agreement goes alongside the future relationship. It's the future relationship that actually delivers, if you like, on people's concerns in the withdrawal agreement. Getting that future relationship right is necessary, but nothing's agreed until everything is agreed.
I understand you're keen to talk about the future relationship, but if you look at the two documents, the future relationship and the divorce deal, if you like, the withdrawal agreement, I mean, one is 585 pages long, the other is 7 pages long. One is meticulously detailed. The other one is fairly vague. There's no legal commitments in there. I mean, do you ever worry that you're being played here, that the EU has asked you to hand over £39 billion on a few kind of vague promises?
No, there's a reason. It may seem a boring reason, but there's a reason why there's a difference between these two documents. And it is, we can't actually sign up to that detailed legal text, indeed negotiate much of that.
You've got to trust them.
No, indeed negotiate much of that legal text until we've actually left the European Union. And if anybody's in any doubt, we are going to leave the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. So what we need from that future relationship is an agreement between us, between the UK and the European Union, that this is what that future relationship is going to be.
Okay.
And if you just think back to where the European Union started on this, they wanted us as a country just to take an off-the-shelf model, the phrase is Norway or a Canada-style treaty for Great Britain only, not for the whole United Kingdom. We fought that. We stood our ground. We said, no, we're the UK. Actually, we can have a better, more ambitious relationship with you that will be good for citizens, good for people here in the UK, and I think good for people in the EU as well. And it took time, but they have come round to that, and they've said, yes, we'll agree a more ambitious relationship with the UK than we, the EU, at first thought we could give you.
Now, I do want to focus a little bit on the backstop, because this is effectively why you've lost your Brexit secretary this week. Lots of people are very concerned about it. And just one part in particular of that withdrawal agreement that I think we can have a look at. So the withdrawal agreement says the backstop can only be brought to an end if the Union and the United Kingdom decide jointly that it is no longer necessary to achieve its objectives. I mean, this is what Dominic Raab was concerned about, isn't it? This idea that we can't unilaterally decide to leave the backstop. It's a bit like the Hotel California. You can never leave.
No, you can leave.
And only if the EU say it's OK.
Well, first of all, let's look at what this backstop is. The backstop's an insurance policy. The backstop is saying to the people of Northern Ireland
but it might
and
happen.
Ireland... No,
I know you don't want it to happen, but it might happen.
But look, if I can just explain, because there's the various stages in this. There's an assumption that somehow this is the only option on the table, and it's not. And that's the first thing that's important for me to say to you. Now, this is an insurance policy. It says that if we come to a point in time where the future relationship that we're negotiating can't be fully in place by the end of December 2020, and we fully intend to ensure it can be, and that's what we're working to. But if there's a short period of time when we need this insurance policy, we need to make sure that people of Northern Ireland still have the reassurance of no hard border between them and Ireland. So we've got two options at that stage, and we can choose whether to have this backstop, as the phrase has come into normal common parlance, or whether to extend the implementation period for a brief period of time.
I understand that you don't want the backstop to happen.
Once you're in the backstop, if it ever happens...
The issue is about being able to leave unilaterally. I mean, we can leave the EU unilaterally by triggering Article 50. It's about sovereignty.
Well, I think, as you've just seen, from 2 years of negotiations on the withdrawal agreement for us leaving the European Union, that yes, there was an article there to leave the European Union, but it's about a negotiation between both sides as to how that is going to be done. That's what we've been entering into. So in the backstop, there will be a review of the backstop, and both sides can say, yes, we agree that there are arrangements in place that provide for the people of Northern Ireland, and therefore that the backstop is no longer necessary if we were in it.
Can we unilaterally leave the backstop? Yes or no? We can't, can we?
But, Sophie, just think about if you took out an insurance policy and if you were coming up to the point where that insurance policy was being used, and suddenly the people providing that insurance policy pulled the plug on it for you, and you were left without that insurance policy, without having any say in it, what would you think?
So you think the EU's is fair enough then for the EU to have this?
Actually, what we're talking about is a backstop we never intend to use. The EU don't want to use it either. It's not the only option that is on the table. Were it to have to be used, both sides can review it, and the process by which we can prove that actually there are other arrangements in place so the backstop can be stopped. And the backstop can only ever be temporary. Under the legal arrangements of the European Union, they cannot enter into a permanent relationship on the basis of this withdrawal agreement. It can only be temporary. And then that's why I focus on the future relationship, because the thing that's going to make the difference to people's jobs, to people's livelihoods, to people's futures in this country is the future relationship we negotiate with the European Union. That's what we must put front and foremost, that it is in the national interest to get that deal right, to ensure that, yes, we're leaving the European Union, we can have those trade deals around the world, we can bring jobs to this country, we can make that better future for people.
OK, now, I'm no mathematician, but I don't see how this deal can get through Parliament. Labour have said that they want to vote against it. The DUP have said they'll vote against it. The SNP, the Liberal Democrats, dozens of your own MPs. It's not going to get through, is it?
Well, look, when it comes to Parliament, members of Parliament will have to look at the deal. But I think, as I've previously said, I think they should also think what this is about. This is about delivering on Brexit. It's about ensuring that we deliver what people in this country voted for.
I know you think it's a good deal, but it's not going to get through Parliament right now.
When people come to look at this deal, that's what they need to think about. But let's look at some of the positions that you've said other parties have taken. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn in the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn is clear. He's going to vote against this, whatever. He hasn't even fully read it. He doesn't even know what's in it. And yet already he's saying he's going to vote against it. Why? Because he's playing party politics with this. This isn't about party politics. This is about what matters for this country. It's about what is in the national interest. That's what I'm determined to deliver, a deal that's good for the people of this country.
What happens if it doesn't get through Parliament? Would you be prepared to bring it back for another vote?
Look, there's a process that Parliament will go through. If were it the case that the deal was lost, then the government would come back with their proposals for what the next step was. But we're not at that point. We're at the point of a week's further to go in the negotiation, when we have that agreement with the European Union at the EU Council and bring it back to the House of Commons. What I'm saying is I think every member of Parliament will want to look at the deal, but they'll want to ask themselves, how can I make sure that we deliver Brexit, and how can I do it in a way that's good for my constituents? And remember, there are those in the House of Commons who just want to stop Brexit. I believe it is essential for people's trust in politics and trust in Parliament that we deliver on Brexit for people.
Now, this weekend, your future is hanging by a thread. Conservative MPs, we know, submitting letters of no confidence to the chair of the 1922 committee, Sir Graham Brady. If that reaches 48, there will be a vote of no confidence in your leadership. When was the last time that you spoke to Sir Graham Brady?
Oh, I spoke to Sir Graham Brady at the end of last week.
So do you know if he's reached the 48 letters?
I have regular conversations with Sir Graham Brady. But let me just...
Has he reached the 48 letters?
Just as Graham Brady will make it known if 48 letters are reached, Graham Brady will make that known.
Do you
but
know?
Let me just,
Do you know?
But just comment. I have not, as far as I know, no. The answer to your question is no. But can I just address this?
Sorry, so the answer to the question is that the 48 limit has not been reached.
As far as I know, no, it has not. But let me just address this issue about the question of leadership. As I say, to me, this isn't about me. It's actually about what's right for the country. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to be distracted from actually the important job in this critical week of negotiations of making sure we do get that final good deal for the country. But, you know, a change of leadership at this point isn't going to make the negotiations any easier, and it's not going to change the parliamentary arithmetic. What it will do is bring in a degree of uncertainty. That's uncertainty for people and their jobs. What it will do is mean that it is a risk that actually we delay the negotiations, and that's a risk that Brexit gets delayed or frustrated. I'm clear people voted for us to leave. We will leave, and we'll leave on the 29th of March 2019.
Now, the last week must be have been personally very difficult for you. We can have a quick look at something that your chief whip said, a message to some of your MPs. The Prime Minister will not be bullied and will not change course. Do you think some MPs have been trying to bully you, and what would your message be to them?
Look, this is an issue on which people have had very strong views. Some of them have held those very strong views for a very long time. We're coming to the point at which some difficult decisions have to be taken about how we ensure that we deliver Brexit for the British people. I think, you know, obviously people have been making their views known, and that's understandable. We live in a democracy. But when it comes to it, I ask all of my colleagues to think about this, to think about ensuring that we can deliver Brexit for the British people, to think about ensuring that we do it in a way that is good for our constituents, not some debate in Westminster. You know, it's very easy in Westminster to get involved in intricacies of debate and not to remember that actually what this is about is not us. It's about people out there. It's about their futures.
You say it's not about us, but at the same time, your leadership is in a critical point right now. And I am interested in the impact it's had on you personally, because some of the language we've heard, some of the anonymous briefings in recent weeks have been, frankly, pretty horrific. I mean, we've heard talk of killing zones, of nooses, of assassinations. I mean, how does that make you feel?
Well, first of all, I think all of us in politics have a responsibility to make sure that when we talk about things, we do so responsibly and we think about the sort of terminology and the language that we're using. But look, it doesn't distract me from the main task at hand, and that's why coming back to this. Politics is a tough business, and I've been in it a long time. So I've seen the ups and downs of politics. I've seen the sort of, you know, and I've been through some tough times myself in the past in politics. I always think the important thing is to say, what are we here for? Who are we here for? And we're here for our constituents. As Prime Minister, I'm here for the people of this country. And that's what we must put first and foremost, their interests. That's what must drive us. It's what drives me, is what's going to drive me in the negotiations over the next week.
In a week when people have been queuing up to criticise the decisions that you've made, that they believe that you were going down the wrong track, for better or worse. I just wonder what it is that makes you keep going. I mean, in the past you've spoken about your father's sense of duty. He was a vicar. Has your faith helped?
Well, that's a part. I mean, that is a sort of integral part of me, if you like. But it's what drives me, what keeps me going in this, is knowing that actually I think we have a duty as a government. I think we have a duty as a parliament to listen to people. If you think back pre the 2016 referendum, Parliament overwhelmingly said this must be a choice of the British people, and we gave people that vote, and they gave us their vote, and they said let's leave. And I believe it's absolutely critical that we do that. And we can have, you know, debates within Westminster about, is this the perfect Brexit from one person's viewpoint or the perfect Brexit from somebody else's viewpoint? What matters is that we deliver Brexit. And what matters is that when people come to look at this deal and vote for it in Parliament, they recognise the importance of ensuring we're delivering Brexit. And I don't want to risk ending up in a situation where Brexit is somehow delayed or people try to stop it from happening. We are going to deliver for people. We're going to leave the EU, and that's going to happen next March.
And then just finally, Prime Minister, there's been some studies over the years that have showed that in good times, companies are more likely to appoint men to leadership positions, but in times of crisis, they're more likely to appoint women. Why do you think that is?
Look, I haven't seen that research, so I don't know what the basis of that research is. Look, I think all I would say is that I look at this as a politician, as a member of Parliament, as a Prime Minister, and I would hope, as I do, I will hope that every other member of the House of Commons will think not about themselves, not about the theological arguments of Brexit, but actually think about what matters for people up and down this country. Let's give them the certainty of that bright future. That's delivering Brexit on a good deal. That's this deal. OK, big questions for all MPs coming up. Prime Minister, thank you much for being with us this morning. And finally, just before we go after a very busy show, as you may have seen, Sky News is campaigning for an independent commission to have leaders' debates at general elections. We believe that leaders' debates are an important part of election campaigns, and you should get the chance to hear directly from those who want to be elected to govern us. So far, almost 70,000 people have joined the campaign. When it reaches 100,000, the government will have to respond. So please, if you like, go to skynews.com/make debates happen, and you can add your signature to the petition. Well, that's it for this week. Next Sunday, if everything goes to plan, EU leaders will be gathering in Brussels to sign off that draft Brexit deal. We'll be there too. You can stay with Sky News as we react to what we've just heard from Theresa May. Thank you for watching.
Football on Sports Hub, presented by Hankook.